number one Ford has established a lead of 32 miles. The expected challenge from Ferrari hasn't developed. 15 cars have already dropped out, trying to keep up with the bright red Ford.
It's one of racing's legendary stories. In 1963, Ford Motor Company agrees to buy Ferrari, the Italian automaker famed for its exotic sports cars and exceptional racing team. At the 11th hour, founder Enzo Ferrari backs out of the deal. Upset but undaunted, Ford chairman and CEO Henry Ford II, grandson of the company's founder Henry Ford, makes a decision. If his company can't buy Ferrari, then it'll beat Ferrari at the greatest sports car race in the world.
So they're going to go challenge Ferrari on their favorite ground, which at that time was the 24-hour of Le Mans. And this was a big gamble basically on Ford's part because they really had no experience in long-distance sports car racing. They were kind of out of their element, and this was a place where Ferrari had reigned supreme for years.
The 24 Hours of Le Mans, held each year in Western France, was never about speed. It was a test of endurance.
The circuit itself is about 8.34 miles around. There's some very sharp turns. There's an exceptionally long straightaway, the Mulsanne Straight, where this car, the Mark IV, was doing about 212 miles an hour. But at the end of that straightaway, there's this hairpin turn where you've got to slow down to about 30, 35 miles an hour to make it through there safely. So going through those kinds of things again and again and again throughout the course of 24 hours, you can imagine how hard that is on the mechanicals of the car, to say nothing of the strain it puts on the two drivers.
Just finishing the race was a major achievement, and a Ford victory wouldn't come easy. The company approached British engineer Eric Broadley of Lola Cars.
And he had a car called the Lola GT, which was a beautiful car, lowest car of really any around at that time, only about 42 inches off the ground. Ford decides they'll cut a deal with him and use the Lola GT as the basis of their next automobile. Though the Ford race car turns up being even lower than the Broadley car by 2 inches.
With its roof just 40 inches high, the racing press dubbed Ford's car the GT40. The car's debut at Le Mans in 1964 was promising. A GT40 led the first hour and a half, but 90 minutes are meaningless in a race of 24 hours.
They went into 64 probably thinking they'd put on a good show. I don't know if they thought that they'd win their first time out, but not so good a show. None of their cars actually managed to finish, so it must have been a little disappointing.
Ford turned to Le Mans veteran Carroll Shelby.
John Wire built the car and then took it to Le Mans in 1964, and it didn't do very good, and that's when they turned the program over to us in California.
Shelby's crew took the cars apart, cutting weight and improving airflow. And in February 1965, the GT40 earned its first victory at the Daytona 2,000-kilometer race. 4 months later, Shelby went back to Le Mans with a potent new weapon. The GT40 Mark II replaced the original 289 Ford V8 with the company's big, NASCAR-proven 427. But the French Classic brought disappointment again. 6 Fords were entered, none finished. Luck changed in 1966. Buoyed by wins earlier in the season, Ford brought 8 Mark IIs to Le Mans, backed by spare engines, equipment, and an army of 100 people.
We had specialists for everything was on hand if needed. I mean, wiper specialists, light specialists, engine specialists, wheels, brake. There were specialists there for everything if it should occur.
When race time arrived at 4 p.m., Henry Ford II himself dropped the starting flag. The Mark IIs set a furious pace. Drivers Ken Miles and Dan Gurney averaged better than 140 miles per hour on some laps. This time, however, it was Ferrari that failed to finish. As the race's end drew near, 3 Mark IIs led the field. Ken Miles and Denny Hulme were in first with the number 1 car, followed by Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon in the number 2 car. Ronnie Bucknam and Dick Hutcherson held the 3rd position with their number 5 car. Sensing a publicity bonanza, Ford executives hatched a plan.
Ken Miles had already won Daytona and Sebring. He was leading by a lap and a half, and the aristocracy at Ford decided they'd have all 3 cars cross the finish line at the same time because they were running 1, 2, 3.
Professionals all, the drivers did as they were told and crossed the finish line as close together as possible. But a technicality ruined Ford's scheme.
Le Mans, I've always thought they made the rule up that Bruce McLaren had started a little further back in the Le Mans start, so they said that they had run 50 feet further than the others. And if anything ever broke a man's heart, it was the fact that Ken Miles would have been the first and only person to ever win all 3 races in the same year.
Despite the voided tie, the 1-2-3 finish was a dramatic realization of Ford's goal. The campaign could have ended then and there, but within weeks, Ford made it official. It would return to Le Mans in 1967, and with an entirely new car designed and built in the United States.
We barely had taken time just to clean up the aftermath and inventory parts and things like that when the word came, hey, we're going to do it again.
Ford set its hopes on the experimental J car, named for its compliance with Appendix J of the Le Mans rulebook. Apart from the big block 427 engine and powertrain, it carried very little over from the Mark II. It was a leaner, lighter car, but just 2 months after the Le Mans triumph, Ford's GT program hit its lowest point when Ken Miles was killed testing the J car in California. Ford engineers struggled to correct the J car. They made the chassis stronger and reworked the body, but handling remained poor. Phil Remington, Shelby's top fabricator, flew to Dearborn, and within a week of round-the-clock work, he and the Ford staff resculpted the J car into a longer, sleeker, and safer car, the Mark IV.
He did a lot of the design work in, as they said, the wind tunnel in his head. He kind of imagined how the car should look, changed some of the lines, the look of it, and then they actually tested it in an actual wind tunnel here in Dearborn and found out that Remington's design had shaved about 100 pounds worth of drag from the vehicle. So you've got this great mix of aerodynamic ability kind of piercing through the air, but also downforce holding the car to the track to prevent another accident of the type that took Ken Miles' life.
Their efforts paid off in the Mark IV's first race when it won the Sebring 12-hour in April 1967 with Bruce McLaren and Mario Andretti at the wheel. And now everyone looked forward to Le Mans. But Ferrari came to France with a new car of its own. The 330 P4 boasted a 244 cubic inch V12 capable of 450 horsepower, not far from the Mark IV's 500 horses. The Mark IV had an ominous debut at Le Mans when windshields cracked during pre-race practice. Ford had brought spares, but not enough for each of the Mark IVs entered. An urgent phone call was made to the States.
The next morning in Orly, in Paris, a 707 arrived with 6 windshields.
Crisis averted. On race day, Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt drove the red #1 car. Speed wasn't an issue for them. Keeping the car in one piece for the length of the race, that was cause for concern.
Well, the car was unbelievable fast. I mean, it was just very, very fast. Nobody could even run close to us. And the biggest thing was just keeping it running 24 hours.
The Mark IV was a great car, and if it had an Achilles heel, it would be in the brakes. The car was pretty heavy, probably 500 pounds heavier than most other cars in that same race. And it would go fast, 212 or so, a little bit more, and probably weighed pretty close to 3,000 pounds. So the brakes had a lot of work to do after a 3-mile straightaway where you're really cooking.
Gurney and Foyt took the lead after 90 minutes, and they never looked back. Through it all, they kept a disciplined pace. The strategy led to a surreal moment at 2:30 in the morning when one of Ferrari's top drivers pulled close behind Gurney.
Michael Parks was the team leading engineer for their sports car program and a very competent racer and engineer. Sure enough, here comes Mike Parks all over me, and he's on that light switch, you know, flicker, 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 like that, and you're kind of...
Parks was looking for a fight, hoping Gurney would push the Mark IV too hard or make a mistake.
I was getting pretty tired of it. And this went on for about 4 or 5 laps every time, and he's all over me, and I wanted to say, hey, listen, you know, let's get down to it, but I refused to do it. I just pulled off to the right after leaving Arnage, and there was a grass verge there. I pulled up and stopped on the grass, and Mike pulled up and stopped right behind us.
It was brilliant. He just pulled over and stopped.
For about 10 seconds, what felt like an eternity, the two leading cars sat at a dead stop. Gurney's ploy worked. The frustrated Parks pulled back on the track and sped away. Gurney, racing again on his own terms, caught and passed Parks within 5 laps.
That really was, I think, a signature illustration of how restrained Gurney was. And he was able to convince Foyt that that was the way to win this race, too. Let's not push this car so hard that we destroy it and knock ourselves out of the race in the process.
Le Mans took its usual toll on machinery. 3 Ford cars were lost in a single accident at 3:30 a.m. But the red number 1 car never skipped a beat. When A.J. Foyt crossed the finish line at 4 p.m., he was 32 miles ahead of the second-place Ferrari.
There's the checkered flag.
He and Gurney had covered 3,250 miles in 24 hours and set a new average race speed record of 135.48 miles per hour. Foyt and Gurney climbed the winner's podium. As he stood there with a bottle of champagne in his hands, Gurney looked out over the crowd of press photographers.
So we're up there and looking, and there were just a sea of photographers down below, and they're all looking back at us, and there was a moment where nobody was telling us what to do, but I could tell that they were expecting something.
Caught up in the moment, Gurney shook his champagne and sprayed it over everyone.
It was like a fire hose. I was getting people maybe 15 feet away down below and just ruining all the cameras, and they were loving it.
It was the dawn of a new sports tradition and the perfect way to celebrate an all-American victory.
I had no idea it would create a tradition that is still there today. That was 1967, so it was a very special moment.
Ford Motor Company had made its point. It could build race cars as good as any in the world, and it could win the greatest race of them all.
There are hundreds of people that go into that victory. Engineers like Mose Nolan, team leaders like Carroll Shelby, folks at all levels who are making this win possible.
To put that program together inside a big company, it's the only program I've ever known that didn't have a budget, because Henry said we're going to do it.
It was a good project for the company at the time. The morale was very high. You felt very proud about being part of it.
It was a really great part of my whole driving career, and as an American on an American team and a team with an American, even though he's from Texas, it was a terrific victory.
You know, to me, it won Indy a couple weeks before that with Ford Power, and then have Ford Power over there. To me, it was a great honor to be at Le Mans one time. Like I said, that was my first and last time, and not planning on going back. So I can say last time I was there, I won the race, and that's it.